humanoid encounters, specifically dwarf-like creatures. These dwarf-like creatures, these humanoid encounters, it's related to the UFO stuff because a lot of times when these weird humanoids are seen, they're often seen coming out of a ball of light, a craft, or there is a UFO sighting in the vicinity of this. But these are dwarf humanoid sightings and encounters from all ages. So I'll read down a few of these, and we'll talk about them. So this first one is from the year 1065. And this is from an ancient manuscript. So it says, local residents observed a strange sign in the sky, a huge star with blood-red beams of light. This phenomenon lasted for 7 days straight. It was seen only during the evening. Around that time, a childlike dwarf-type entity was found by a fisherman in the river. The dwarf was pulled out of the river in a net. The fisherman kept watch over the strange entity until late afternoon, then threw it back in the river out of fear and its repugnancy. The dwarf-like entity was very strange and had a wrinkled face and other shameless details on his face and body, although that wasn't specified with those.
So he's a little ugly.
Yeah. It was an ugly little dwarf thing they found in a river. He kept it around for a little bit and then threw it back in the river.
I'm sure that's how he said it. It's like, I kept it around for a little bit, threw it back in the river.
And that was from the Ukraine. A lot of these stories are going to be from Eastern Europe, Ukraine area, or Russia.
I kept it around for a while, then I threw it back in the river.
And this next one is from the year 1138 in Germany. It was reported that a dwarf was captured in the cellar of a German monastery. It was dark-skinned and did not speak any known language. In the weeks that followed, the monks attempted to draw their visitor into Christian society, but the little fellow would not speak a word. He spent time there cross-legged on his bed, looking straight ahead and refusing all foods and drinks. He was tied up briefly by a rope and was shackled to see what he would do.
See, that's the part that is weird. Why even tie the guy up?
Well, we just want to see what he does when he's shackled to the wall. He returned to the cellar where he was found and there raised a stone on the ground and disappeared through a tunnel where nobody was able to follow him. The mysterious tunnel was reportedly sealed with a cross. This is from 1138. They found this little dwarf guy. He didn't speak anything, so the monks were like, I don't know, let's see if we can Christianize this bastard. They take him up there to the church. He didn't take the Christianity, so they took him back down to the cellar, tied him up just because they wanted to see what would happen. And then
if he was a demon, he would escape. It's kind of like a test, like a throwing a witch in the river.
I see what you're saying. Yeah. But he did escape under a stone, and they sealed that tunnel off with a cross. So that was from Germany.
It sounds like a bullshit story someone's telling. Like, well, put the little guy in the basement, and sealed it with the cross. He escaped. I don't know. Don't worry about it. Move on.
So that was sourced from Extraterrestrials Throughout History. That came out in 1970. The original source was just go back even further than that. So a lot of these are anecdotal, and so you got to kind of take it for what it is. So this next one is from Russia, 1908. According to data allegedly obtained by a scientific expedition in 1927 to the area near the, Tunguska explosion? So there's that giant air burst in Russia, knocked down all those trees. So a scientific expedition that just after the catastrophe, there was a local resident who reportedly encountered a bizarre creature which he apparently captured and took home. According to the description, the entity resembled more of a devil than a human. It was dwarf-like, a little bit more than a meter high, with large green eyes, smooth, shiny skin, and with some protrusions on its forehead and a short tail. The local man kept the creature in his cattle shed. He told the other residents in the village that he found some creature in the clearing amid the dense pine forest. The creature was reportedly injured and very weakened. Despite protests from his neighbors, the man cared for the creature, feeding it and even taking it out for walks at night. As a result of this, all local dogs from the village went crazy, barking while the creature was outside. Then the creature mysteriously vanished. The man claimed that the entity had just walked into the forest. Soon after, the man was stricken with an unknown illness. His hair and teeth began to fall out, and he lost a lot of weight. He became very thin and eventually died. Speculated that he died from radiation poisoning. So, I mean, just no good deed goes unpunished. You find a little horned dwarf devil in the woods, you take him home, you try to feed him, and next thing you know, boom, you're dead from radiation poisoning.
I think what this all comes from is like a dwarf hatred. It seems like a lot of dwarves are getting really just kind of painted as devils, and if I were a dwarf, I'd be very offended by
I agree.
Historical kind of
there's a historical bias against these dwarf-like creatures.
Yeah, if you're a dwarf, you're going to be some sort of diabolical. But you know,
listen, if we find you and you're small, we're gonna try to Christianize you. If that doesn't work, we'll chain you up to a wall, and maybe we'll feed you a little bit. Just please don't poison us with radiation.
But then it also makes me think, if the other side of it is maybe there's something to it. Maybe dwarves are, you know, inherently evil in some way.
It's possible we have to go with that option too.
we have to entertain both sides of the argument.
Maybe they're just that an evil bias in them. But I got a few more here. This is from 1920, New Zealand, so opposite side of the world. The witness had just finished hanging some clothes and had stepped out when she heard a soft galloping coming the direction of the orchard. She crossed the yard to get the pegs, I'm not sure what that is, and heard the galloping coming closer. As she stood under the clothesline, she saw a little figure riding a tiny pony close beside her. It rode right up under her uplifted arms. She looked around and found herself surrounded by 8 or 10 tiny figures on tiny ponies resembling dwarven Shetlands. The little figures had come close to her, stood out quite clearly in the light that came from the window, but he had his back to it, and she could not see his face. The face of the others were quite brown. The ponies were brown. They were close-fitting, dark jersey-like clothing. They resembled tiny dwarves or children about 2 years old. Startled, the witness cried out, and the tiny figures galloped away and disappeared into the distance. So, I mean, what do you make of that? Tiny dwarf creatures riding tiny ponies coming up on a woman who's just trying to dry her clothes. Well,
it's like, if I heard a few different people that didn't know each other say the same thing, then I would say there's definitely a bunch of little people out here doing, fucking around.
So these next two stories here, just pay attention to some of the details in here. So I got two stories. This first one is from France. And this is 1942 in France. A woman peddler went into her garden where it was near a bomb shelter. Then she suddenly came nose to nose with 3 dwarves. In the moonlight, she was able to see clearly that they were not children. Their heads were large and round, and they wore short beards. Most notably, their eyes large and had a luminous yellow color. They were dressed in tight one-piece suits and shiny metallic sheen. These extended over their heads like tight-fitted cowls, leaving only their faces exposed. They stood there motionless, each one slightly separated from the other, arms slightly bent and rigid. Frightened, the woman turned and hurried into the house, calling for her husband. By the time he got outside, there was nothing to be seen. So that was from 1942, France, and this next story is from 1945, Russia.
But did she write that thing? I mean, who wrote that? Someone wrote that, and maybe flowered it up a bit, like
It's possible. And so that was sourced from Joel Mesnard and Jean Mary Bigorn. Now, I don't know where they got that information from.
I like direct witness quotes, that's what I want.
Yeah, I agree.
Or drawings that the witnesses do, that kind of shit.
This next one comes from a Pravda newspaper. This is 1945, Russia. Local resident suddenly encountered three strange entities. So three strange entities outside his home. All three were dwarf-like and about 120 to 130 centimeters in height and moved very fast using rapid motions. Their demeanor was described as peaceful. The humanoids were dressed in tight-fitting suits with belts, gloves, and boots, which appeared part of the suit. Their heads were totally covered by round helmets with a huge oval-shaped, tight-fitted, dark goggles covering their faces. They had small protrusions on the tops of their helmet. They had very wide shoulders, as if they had small covered wings on their back. In place of a mouth, they had in place of the mouths on their helmet, they had long slit-like openings. There was also some kind of straps that joined the coveralls to the elbows, ankles, wrists, and neck area. The witness was stunned as the humanoids seemed to disappear and appear at any given moment. They eventually vanished and did not return. So another encounter of three dwarf-like creatures wearing tight kind of suits. You could almost say like maybe like some kind of airlock suit or exposure suit.
That one seemed more concise and
that was reported by a Moscow newspaper. It was reprinted in 1996.
Sure. Maybe I just don't like the flowery language of the other writer. Yeah, it's a different guy, right? Same thing though.
It's the same kind of thing. It's like
it's still based on whoever was writing the article. It's always going to have an influence on it. But you're right; it's roughly the same exact thing.
The same kind of descriptions, like over time. Like a lot of these dwarven encounters, people are like they have like tiny little suits on, and they're dressed up in a kind of uniform. It's like if you have a uniform and you're hanging out, like then you probably have a job or a purpose. What is their job or purpose? Because you're in some sort of outfit that it conforms with the rest of the people you're with.
You're trying to question the purpose of little people, and I don't appreciate it.
It's we don't like it, but there's so many other stories that I've read. These are just like some snippets that I picked out because they're short and concise. But I've read stories where there was this young boy who was out playing. He's about 12. He encountered these dwarf or elf-like creatures. They were playing together, and they told him, we could take you to a place where you could have anything you want. It's always happiness, and it's fun all the time. So they take him through this tunnel, and he winds up in this totally different realm, which is pretty much everything is made with gold. Beds are made with gold, and couches, and it's not comfortable to sit on a gold couch, but everything was just like made with gold.
Solid gold couch.
And he had they played with like a gold ball, and they just kind of rolled it around. He went back, talked to some people, and told them what he discovered, and they said, "Oh yeah, right. If you're actually playing with these elves in this gold environment, why don't you steal us a gold ball?" And so next time he went back, he tried to steal a gold ball. It was too heavy. He fumbled with it. And then they realized, the elves and the dwarves realized that he was trying to take gold from their realm. They chased him out of there, sealed the hole, and he was never able to find that entrance again. I mean, these are just stories throughout time. It's local folklore. A lot of goes back to like fairy folklore. There's always a big history with goblins, kobolds, gnomes, all that kind of stuff throughout Western Europe, Eastern Europe. There's something there. These stories are persistent throughout time.